Well, hello, everybody. It's Mike from Profiling Evil. I'm here in Europe this next couple of weeks, but I didn't want to miss the chance to share with you some of the dialogue I had on Court TV with Julie Grant. We've been looking at the Johnny Depp case. You've been seeing it. You've been reading about it. Even if you don't want to admit it, you're probably paying a little bit of attention. This is one bizarre case, but the thing that's so interesting to me is that the case is really about domestic violence. This is a serious subject that can sometimes lead to homicide. These are things that must be taken seriously. But as we look at this case, the first thing that I talked to Julie about was my impressions about the manager at the desk at the home when this first event occurred. Listen in as I talk about his testimony and what I thought about what was going on.
With me in Columbia, South Carolina, criminal defense attorney John Mobley, and joining the conversation, retired police commander and the host of the Profiling Evil podcast, Mike King, joining us all the way in France. Mike, welcome to the program. All of our Court TV viewers who watch internationally have to be really excited that you're over there getting a lot of tweets from France throughout the last couple of weeks. And I want you to weigh in first, since you're just joining us this hour. Tell me, focusing just on this witness here, we've got the building manager up there, and counsel for Amber Heard is trying so hard to get something out of him that's favorable. It's just not happening. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, wasn't that a great piece of testimony? I loved watching this guy because he's believable and he's relatable, and that's a powerful witness to have. The thing I really liked is that he's just a common guy, and he says, you can put makeup on, but you can't hide a swelling. That's really powerful. And that defense attorney is just working really hard trying to get him to say, well, I don't know whether it was there or not, but he's pretty solid on the fact that I'm not seeing swelling. I didn't see anything that was out of the norm for me. And you can feel the emotion of this guy. He likes both of these people, I would suspect. And he doesn't want to be there, but he is trying to tell the truth.
Right, absolutely, Mike. He was so believable, and the testimony was kind of endearing when he was like, I just don't want to deal with this anymore, and everybody laughs, and our cameras caught, you could see Johnny Depp, you know, kind of smile and put his head down, cover his mouth a little bit. John Mobley, you know, as an advocate, as somebody who knows how powerful it is to choose to sit down and not continue questioning. Do you think counsel's making a mistake to keep going and going with all these questions about the makeup when first answer out of his mouth was, I don't know if she's wearing makeup, and she asked 6 more about it?
Well, I do agree in a certain context, and I think it's important to understand that this testimony was given in a deposition as opposed to on the witness stand in the trial. And they're two different animals. I would certainly agree that, of course, the witness was a great witness. He was not giving the attorney what she wanted. She was trying to somehow discredit him and get him to concede that he really couldn't tell whether or not she was abused, but she just wasn't going to shake him. But I think what's important to understand is if this was on the witness stand at a trial, I would agree that she was going on way too long. She should have made her points, or when she saw she wasn't going to get the point she was trying to make, she should have sat down. The difference in this case is this testimony was taken during a deposition, which is not the same context as the trial. A deposition is a place, an opportunity to ask questions of the witness and find out what they know. So in a deposition, the strategy is different. There's no jury. There's no judge that's shutting you down. There's no jury you're trying to worry about their mental state, their attention span. You have the opportunity to ask details as much as you can. And I think from that standpoint, she did what she was supposed to do.
She was definitely on a fact-finding mission there. That is for sure, John. Excellent point. As I was watching, I kept thinking of that Rolling Stones song, You Can't Always Get What You Want. And I kept thinking, like, I know what she wants out of this witness, but it's not happening. It's just not. Get it from another witness.
That's correct. I didn't see any marks or bruises. You didn't see any swelling either, did you, Mr. Romero? That's correct. No swelling at all. And she was only 3 or 4 feet away from you, correct? Correct. And you were looking right into her face squarely, correct?
Correct.
And the lighting was good at the front desk, correct?
Objection.
Correct. It was so good that had she had any bruises, swelling, or marks on her face, you would have noticed that, correct?
That's correct.
You know, from there, we really started to dig into the crux of what's going on here, domestic violence, and the question about why victims might sometimes not report or follow through with a report when they make one. In this particular case, we hear Amber Heard's testimony that she is saying that she withdrew and said to police she didn't want to charge Johnny. Now she's saying it absolutely happened. There are cases where that is exactly what occurs. On the flip side, Johnny Depp's side is saying it never happened, and if there ever was abuse, that he was the victim. Listen in as we listen to the testimony of police officers who responded to the scene. And then listen in as a former Nashville sergeant and I talk about this dynamic of domestic violence and the responsibility that police officers face when they go to these kinds of cases. I think you're going to be interested with the dialogue.
My guests on the program today, we have two people who have served in law enforcement for many years. Still with me, retired police commander and the host of the Profiling Evil podcast, Mike King, joining us all the way from France. And we want to welcome into the conversation retired police sergeant Melissa Pinkleton. She served for the Nashville Police Department. She's joining us from Tennessee. Great to have you both here. Sarge, I want to start with you, if I may, please, since we're just welcoming you this hour. The jury's due back in a couple of minutes. Through these police witnesses, we keep hearing kind of the similar story, how they're showing up, they're there to do a job, but we have someone who won't cooperate with them in the way of giving an interview, making a report, helping them do their job. And then here, months, you know, years down the road, I should say, not months, years, we have counsel kind of asking, well, you know, what did you see? What did you find? And it was a whole lot of nothing. Talk to me, please, about how difficult that is when you're a responding officer and someone isn't cooperating, but you still have to complete an investigation.
Well, thank you for having me back, first of all. I appreciate it. And you really hit the nail on the head. It's a whole lot of nothing. And it's very difficult when a witness or an alleged victim doesn't want to comply or even make a statement. They went there, they did their job, they made the observations that they made. He even noticed that while her face looked red, it looked like she noticed that she was obviously crying, so her face was red from that. And as a police officer on the street, you answer many domestics. It's one of the, just like traffic stops, you do a lot of traffic stops, domestics are one of the most frequent calls that we respond to. So you get really good at reading people, reading and looking at the victims and looking at injuries on their face and whatnot, but she didn't want to cooperate. She didn't want to report. And they also deemed it was not a domestic at the time. So that's why no report was done. That's why no pamphlet was given. And I just want to go and touch on something one of your last guests said. It is important to bring awareness to domestic violence victims and to the suspects. But I want to tell you something. As a police officer for as long as I was, there's a flip side to that. There are a lot of women who use and know the system for domestic violence and use it as a weapon against men. And they will call in injuries, they will call in the police and have them come. And because they know that if they say the right thing, they could end up getting warrants on their partner and take them to jail. So while there are many victims, there is a flip side to this, and it is abuse. And we've heard testimony a few days ago or even yesterday from the psychologist of Amber Heard's that she has a tendency to exaggerate things. So that tends to lead me to believe that maybe there was an exaggeration. I'm not saying there was absolutely no abuse, but the officers did the right thing. They took the steps they needed to take and did what they needed to do.
I'm glad you brought that up, Sergeant Melissa. Thank you. Let's talk about that while we have a moment. Commander, certainly it is true. Not every reporting person is an honest person. There are people, as Sergeant pointed out, that will manipulate the system. And I remember seeing it, you know, sometimes in this happening to people that I've known in Pennsylvania, where I was a prosecutor. They called them protection from abuse orders, or PFAs, which other places they might be called restraining orders, but it's a civil order. However, there can be criminal ramifications if it's violated, and oftentimes it's a companion, as you know, to domestic violence cases. And sometimes I have seen that, and it's very easy to obtain one because the presumption leans in favor of victims, as it should. It should be set up that way as a matter of policy because we want victims to be protected. But Commander, as somebody who has to go and vet things, how difficult can that be when you do have somebody who might be coming forward for a restraining order just to use it as a weapon, or making a call just to drag somebody's name through the mud? How do you try to assess the situation to determine who's truly a victim and who might be a liar?
You know, Julie, I think of you as a prosecutor, and the prosecutors that I had to present cases in front of, or that the sergeant had to present cases in front of, they require more than just simple words. They have to have other forms of evidence that back up the allegation, and just the fact that somebody says something happens doesn't mean it happened. And that's why it's so important that we have testimony about the physical evidence and whether there was physical evidence in this case. I did a little bit of math while you were showing that police officer talking, and I wanted to just put into context too how many cases a police officer handles in that deposition from 2021 would have been roughly 6 years after the event, if my math is correct. And looking at a normal cop's day of service, they might handle 10 calls for service on average. And if that same officer has a couple of weeks of vacation, maybe a week of sick leave, and a couple of weeks of in-service training that's mandatory every year, if we were really generous and said that they only worked 40 weeks in a year, that's 12,000 counts that this officer's having to try to remember. And of course, it would be very memorable if you ended up handling a case with Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. I think you would remember that, especially if you were a cop in Los Angeles and dealt in that community often. But this is a really tough thing for an officer who put an unfounded report into play to be able to go back and remember the circumstances. And I think we need to cut them a little bit of slack, because in that organization, they were allowed to do an unfounded report and move on and say, no, we didn't find anything to back this up or support it. But then I'm going to play devil's advocate with myself and say, and then you have Gabby Petito on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, who also didn't want anything to happen, and yet we know how serious those kinds of cases can become.
I wanted to kind of continue our conversation. We were talking about domestic violence before the break, because that is really at the heart of these defamation claims. They're both saying each other was the violent person in the relationship, and both saying that they've been victimized by the other. I want to talk to you both about something that I think is kind of a little known fact, something I was unaware of until serving as a prosecutor, and that is how domestic violence calls can be the most lethal calls for police to respond to. Commander, I'm going to go to you first on this one, please. Can you give us some insight as to that, and why they can be so lethal for responding officers?
I think first and foremost, there is so much emotion involved, and it's so interesting. If you talk to any police officer and ask them about a domestic violence incident, probably one of the stories they're going to have is how they were called to a residence, and one spouse or the other identified that they were abused or injured by the other. When they try to effect an arrest, suddenly that victim's spouse turns on the police officer and is beating on the police officer to keep him from arresting this individual. I mean, these things are so touchy, and it is so easy. It's a keg of gunpowder waiting to go off at any moment. And you think about the challenges that the officer has as they come in and try to assess what's going on, to try to get people separated, to try to follow what the law demands in domestic violence, and to try to also be a counselor. And police officers are given this incredible task. And some agencies have been able to figure that secret way of maybe getting a mental health provider to show up on those cases. But there's a time and place for those kinds of things. And when there is a brouhaha going on, it's not the place for a counselor to come in. It first needs to be settled down. People need to be separated, and that thing needs to be put under control. It's a terribly difficult thing for a police officer.
Oh, absolutely, Commander. Very, very dangerous. These situations can get out of control in a split second. They really can. And for the officers trying to sort things out, I can't imagine having to do that. What a task. Sergeant Pinkleton, tell me, you know, when you're there, obviously your own safety is an issue, right? Because we know, as Commander pointed out, the emotions, the volatility of the situation is something. And in also assessing the facts, aren't you also assessing the lethality of the situation between the two people, right? To see if somebody is in grave danger, right?
Absolutely. And the commander made a good point. These are very emotional calls to begin with. So when you are dispatched, you know you're going to a highly emotional, highly fluid call. And a lot of times the information that you get in the call is not all the information by the time you get to the call. So when you get in there, you want to make sure that you are securing your safety, but you get those parties separated and secure and have one officer with one party, ideally, and another officer with another party. And another excellent point that he made was, a lot of these times when you determine the determining factors, look, probable cause is probable cause. And some people, or some cases, domestic violence advocates think that, you know, okay, if a woman says this, then the person should be arrested, or if a man says this. But you still need that level of probable cause. And one statement against another individual is not probable cause. You have to look at their prior arrest history, look for injuries, look for other evidence. But so yes, and they can be lethal. I remember specifically one time, very quickly, this woman, she had been beat, and she wanted him arrested. And my partner and I go to hook the suspect up, and all of a sudden, she is on our backs. And it literally jumped on our backs and do not arrest him. So now it's, wait a minute, he's fighting us, she's fighting us, there's two of us. I mean, we got him into custody, don't get me wrong. He went to jail that day. But so yes, it is dangerous and it is lethal. But being very aware is important on those calls.
Wow, way to go. Thank goodness you were okay and your partner was okay and you were able to arrest him. And one thing to kind of piggyback off of what you're saying, and again, I'm not an expert in domestic violence, but as somebody who's just really tried to educate myself on it and through volunteering in the prevention movement, one thing I have learned is that victims of domestic violence can sometimes still love their abuser with everything they have, even while they're being beaten and abused, because they love the person. They just want the violence to stop. And so hearing you say that, I kept thinking, you know, when you hear this, you're like, oh my gosh, why wouldn't she be hugging you, thanking you for saving her? It's that probably, just educated guess, she's loving him still as a person, even through the beating, because there's a hope that that violence will end. Commander.
Well, I really appreciate, Sarge, I appreciate your story, because that's case in point of what I was saying. I don't know a police officer who doesn't have a similar situation where they tried to do the right thing and the victim in the case turned on them and became one who was assaulting the police officer. But these are just so tough, Julie. And you know, you've managed those in the courtroom, and you've even seen those emotions start to boil in the courtroom. These people, in many cases, do really love each other. But the other side of it that we don't talk about very often is sometimes a mom with children, for instance, may not have a money stream to just go out and start again. And so they're trying to figure out, how am I going to keep my family fed if I have to put up with this a little bit in order to get that? Maybe it's worth it. And,
Sure.
And isn't that a horrid state of affairs?
Yes, excellent point there, Commander. Excellent points you both have made, Commander King and Sergeant Pinkleton. One thing I will end on as the jury's walking in is, think about domestic violence resource centers as a place to donate clothing and items you have in your household for people who need to escape a situation immediately.
Well, I want to thank my friends at Court TV for the chance to do this. Again, I'm calling in from Europe, and for the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be over here working with public safety on a number of different things. Now, the very last thing we talked about in regard to the Johnny Depp trial that's going on right now, we talked about the way in which the defense is questioning and pounding these witnesses and whether it's really working or not. And man, I got to quote Julie Grant from Court TV. It might not be worth the squeeze that they're trying to put on these people because it's really wearing out viewers like me as I watched it. Let's watch this. And then I want to just say to all of you from Europe, thanks for your support of Profiling Evil. You know, last night I met with a mother and an advocate to a young woman named Frauke. Frauke was murdered at age 21. And we're going to talk a little more about her in the coming months, I think. But this is a case where that mother has anguished over the loss of her daughter for many, many years. Folks, when we look into this case, I think you're going to be intrigued by it. But to all of you from around the world that support Profiling Evil, it's an honor to be able to work alongside you and kind of reviewing and figuring out some of these cases.
I want to just give you both a chance to add some quick final thoughts on the case, on where we are, anything you think people at home should be thinking about. Sergeant Melissa, I'll go to you first, please.
Boy, he is making her work for it, isn't he? The question in reference to professional versus personal reputation. I think people should be paying attention, and I can't wait for her to testify. I can't wait for Amber Heard to testify because the impression that I have right now, I believe the expert testimony, and although as eccentric as Johnny Depp is, I believe a lot of what he has said, and I feel like at this point she has exaggerated some things, and I could be wrong, but I'm waiting to see her get up there and testify and see what her response is and see how authentically and how credible she comes across. Because right now I feel like her credibility is in question.
Our sources are telling us she will be the first witness that her side calls, so that should happen next week, we are told. Commander King, last but certainly not least, quick final thoughts.
I'm interested in what the defense is going to do because we've had a chance to hear from Depp's side. I keep putting myself in the position of a juror, Julie, and frankly, I'm getting pretty tired of the questioning.
Yeah, I think the juice is not worth the squeeze for either one of these parties.
Well, as we wind down my time at Court TV this week, again, calling in from Europe, I want to just say thanks for your support of Profiling Evil. I hope you'll hit the like and the subscribe button and ring the bell so you're getting all the notifications. Share with your friends. And if you really like digging into criminal behavior and the criminal justice process, consider joining our channel memberships. My favorite, it's the Academy level. It's where we dig a little deeper into these cases. And if you haven't caught my series on the FLDS, that's the polygamous group down in southern Utah, go back and watch in the content list. There's about 6 videos that we did on that series, and I think you're really going to enjoy them. So from all of us at Profiling Evil, thanks for your support, and we'll see you soon at the next crime scene.